Okay, hello Year 9. Hopefully this works well today. What we're going to do is go through a summary of the poem Unearth by Cobby Eckermann. And as we go, we'll be reading the poem, but also talking about some of the main ideas and meaning. And what I want you to do is to really annotate your poem as well. So annotation is the process of thinking about the meaning and the language and how those work together and writing small notes on the side. So what you'll see here is my annotations here. I'll certainly be encouraging you to write them down and to add little circles and arrows on your page so you can see where they go, but also to add any other ideas of your own that comes up, or if there's something that I mention in this video that isn't in the annotations, which there will be, that you think, oh, that's great, then go ahead and add that. Oh, hello. Okay, all right, so let's have a little look at, first of all, the title of the poem. So we have talked before about how the titles are important, and Unearth is an important motif throughout the poem. So it is digging an archaeological motif. Now, a motif is a recurring image or symbol, so you can see it spelt there. And it shows this desire to uncover and revive Indigenous culture and Indigenous history. It's about unearthing the past and these people that have been buried and hidden within Australian culture. So let's dig up the soil and excavate the past. Breathe life into the bodies of our ancestors. When movement stirs their bones, boomerangs will rattle in unison. Okay, so I think the first thing to point out here is this collective use of pronoun us. Let us. So it's an inclusive, but it's also an imperative. An imperative is a command, let us. So it's including the reader, but also commanding at the same time to excavate the past. And when we think about this word, the verb excavate, it really, for us, holds the connotation or the implication that Indigenous history and culture has been hidden. It's been like an artifact from an ancient time period. We talk about excavating the tombs of Egyptian mummies and things like that, that this culture is seen as a relic from the past, and that verb has a very strong connotation, an implied meaning for that. Breathe life into the bodies of our ancestors. So you'll notice throughout this poem this metaphor of breathing and reviving. You're thinking about how breath is important for life. To breathe air into something is to revive it, to give it new life. So this metaphor is also a motif because it comes up again and again throughout the poem. So wanting to revive and breathe life into ancestors. When movement stirs their bones, boomerangs will rattle in unison. And think about a boomerang here as something that comes back to you. It returns. So you have this sense of the return of the ancestors. And this onomatopoeic rattling, the boomerangs are rattling. It gives a sense of life, but it's also threatening and ominous, like something's going to happen. It is quite a strong image there. So I think one thing to point out before we move on from this stanza is just how much life and movement there is in this first stanza. They're really trying, Cobby Eckermann's trying to make the past seem as if it's alive, as if it's vital, and gives it its own life. It is not the noise of the poinciana. So the poinciana is an Australian native flower, and you can see a picture of it here. If you see a whole tree of it, it's absolutely beautiful. Stirred by the wind in its flaming lens. The sound of the rising warriors echo, a people suppressed by dread. So once again, talking about the imagery in this, we had a lot of movement before, and now you had the sound, so the oral imagery. A-U-R-A-L, the sound. So the rising warriors. There's this depiction of Indigenous Australians as warriors, as a strong and proud race. And these are the ancestors that have been excavated from the past that are now rising. And it's not the noise of nature, it's the noise of not the noise of the tree, it's the indigenous people suppressed by dread. A hot wind whips up dust storms. We glimpse warriors in the mirage. In the future, the petition will be everlasting. So once again, you've got this motif of the wind coming up, new life of rebirth, and it's whipping up. So you can think about that use of alliteration there. It echoes and mirrors the action and the energy of this wind as it whips it up, as it revives the legacy of the indigenous culture. We glimpse warriors in the mirage. So this is obviously a metaphor here. And this idea of the warriors coming up in the mirage. A mirage is usually occurs in a desert, and you'll see kind of a false illusion. But here it's the return of the warriors, and return of the strength and the power and the awe that comes with the indigenous culture. In the future, the petition will be everlasting. So we're thinking about a petition being a demand for change. In the future, this demand for change, this reviewing of perspectives and the need to excavate the past, it will be everlasting. Even when the language is changed, boomerang bones will return to memory. So with the idea of language changing, then is this acknowledgement that Indigenous culture will and is shifting and changing. There are languages that have been lost and are changing, but she acknowledges that Indigenous history, their boomerang bones, their ancestors and their legacy will be remembered. Excavation holes are dug in our minds. So here we have this metaphor of Australians that have forgotten that the loss and suffering experienced by Indigenous histories. They've lost the history and the narrative of our Indigenous populations, and these are represented through those holes that are things that is missing. The constant loss of breath is the legacy. There is blood on the truth. So this metaphor of losing breath, and we think of breath as being a voice but also life, and suggesting that for us that the Indigenous story and the narrative and the culture and identity has a constant loss of breath. It doesn't have the voice or the life or the power that it should have. And I think, as you can see here, it's contrasted with this idea of air and breath in the opening stanzas. If we go back up, you see breathe life into the body of our ancestors, about wanting to revive them. But here in the final stanza, Ali Cobby Eckermann's acknowledging that there is this loss of breath, loss of life, and loss of voice currently for the Indigenous population, and there is blood on the truth. So she acknowledges this violent history of colonisation, and it is a metaphor too. The truth isn't something tangible, and so you certainly can't get blood on it. But it is saying that when we acknowledge the truth, we have to acknowledge that violence. Okay, so this is a beautiful poem by Ali Cobby Eckermann. There's some beautiful layings and metaphors, the excavation, the unearthing, the breathing life, but there's also a lot of imagery. The idea of the movement of the bones, the noise of the warriors, the stirring of the wind. It gives this life and vitality and power to the Indigenous culture, and I really encourage you guys to dive in, to think a little bit more about how this all works together, thinking about onomatopoeia that gives that sound, the use of alliteration that emphasises the movement and the noises and what they really reveal about the Indigenous culture. And hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I do. All right.